live where we are going to be talking about 3 common mistakes that attorneys make when it comes to communication. And Colleen, we've had the opportunity to sit front row at thousands of law firms,
Yep.
and so and it's amazing how there's so many similarities. And you know what? I will say this, Gary, regardless of the size of the firm, it seems like it's the same challenges, same roadblocks that they're facing. We had referenced in an earlier live how we were talking to one firm that was a solopreneur, and they were frustrated because they didn't have systems or processes in place, right?
Mhm.
And then we were talking to a firm with 30 plus attorneys, and we asked them, and they said the same thing, that they're frustrated that they don't have the right systems and processes in place. And so these 3 common mistakes that we're going to talk about that we see attorneys constantly have and traps they step into, they are consistent regardless of the size of your firm. So let's jump in, and Colleen, why don't you start us off with number one, the biggest number one challenge that we see attorneys face when it comes to communication?
Now, I'll start it by saying I understand how busy attorneys are. There's workload, there's just so much to do. But the number one reason in my book is no communication at all, because it's not a priority. You need to prioritize your clients. You need to you need to call them back. You need to answer your phone. You need to communicate. What's the number one reason why people get reported to the bar? Lack of communication, right? And it seems like such an easy solution. Oh, just communicate. But without systems, processes, a plan, I can see that it gets very overwhelming.
Well, and Colleen, let me ask you this though, because the reason why the attorneys aren't communicating is because in many cases there's nothing to communicate, right? And so they it's taking time, and cases always take longer than what the client would like, right? So they, in personal injury, they get in an accident, they want a check next week, right? They're like, oh, I should get a check next week. And Gary, you've got to tell Carly, your dog, that she can participate later.
Sorry.
She's not aware of or she perhaps is agreeing with what Colleen
I was
said.
about to say, maybe she's like, yeah, communication is key. And
She was demonstrating, right?
I love it.
So, Colleen, what would you tell an attorney in a situation like that, where they say they don't have anything to communicate, but yet it's been weeks since the client's heard from them?
So as a consumer, no communication is terrible. And I understand the lawyer's thinking, well, I don't have anything to say, so why am I going to say anything? But just a reach out. Oh, hey, Colleen, we're still working on things. I didn't forget about you. You're not saying I didn't forget about you, but just reaching out tells the consumer, oh, they still care. They're still working on my case. I'm okay now. It's when communication stops, the consumer and myself, because we're all consumers, I worry, do they forget about me? Do they get another case that's more important? Is my case not valuable anymore? Am I going to lose this case? I'm going to the worst place when all I need is just like an email, a text, even a newsletter being like, hey, we're working on this. Here's something to keep you at bay for a while. And I think that that's super key, but it takes time to create good content like that.
Well, and what's interesting about that, Colleen, is it's amazing to me how fast people go to a dark place when there is no lack of communication. They immediately go to, oh no, the world must be falling apart. And it's
even worse than that. I need another lawyer, right? So I need to start calling, because there's no such thing as an exclusive lead. A consumer is going to call a lawyer until they answer their phone. And if they can't get in touch with their lawyer, they're going to say, oh, I'm just going to go find someone else who can help me.
Right. And what's amazing, Colleen, is when many of the attorneys listening to this live know that they have a good intake experience. Some of them do. Not maybe many is a too large of a generalization, but some of them have a good intake experience where they're right there. They're communicating, and then what happens, and Gary, you talk about the importance of consistency all the time. what happens is once they sign with your firm, it
Yep.
feels like to them that the communication just drops. It's gone. And a quote that we talk about all the time at Lawyer.com is, in every interaction, we increase or decrease trust.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we have that lack of communication, that trust really disrupts the trust is gone because consistency has been disrupted.
Yeah, I just want to put an exclamation mark after that, what Colleen said, because I really liked it. Getting a phone call or an email that says, I have nothing to report, and I'm just staying in front of you. I want you to know that I'm paying attention to you, is really what that says, right? There's nothing new, nothing's happened, but you are top of mind. And that's what people want to know, right? That they haven't been forgotten.
Yeah. And Gary, along those lines, Colleen, years ago, I was talking to a property management company, and they had just acquired a new customer who had been with their previous property management company for 7 months, and the home was never rented. The new property management company rented it immediately. And they called the new client and said, hey, are you so glad you came to us? And she goes, no, I loved my last company. He goes, what do you mean? They said, they used to call me every month and tell me my house hasn't rented. Right. And they weren't doing their job, but they communicated to them. And so they loved them just because every month they told them, we're still not renting your place. But the reality is, and I just want to, what Colleen and Gary, what you both said is brilliant. Just that communication has to happen. Even when, Gary, to your point, when he said, I have nothing to report, but, I want to communicate with you anyway. So that's number one. Go ahead.
Now, because we've got tons of lawyers watching us right now. So you call your client, you don't have an update for them, but they're demanding an update. How do you play that so that you come out still looking good and they feel good, even though you don't have an update for them? What does that conversation look like, and how do you execute on that?
It's a great question.
Colleen, I just want to say, I think probably the most important thing is to be proactive, right? Not waiting into those points of time.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point.
And it really doesn't matter what industry you're in. People just want to know that they haven't been forgotten and that you're taking. So I think the most important thing is to reach out before somebody gets to that point. So
no, great point. Great point.
And then acknowledge them that they, their communication, if they're frustrated, acknowledge their feeling. Oh yes, this absolutely can be frustrating. Yeah. Here's what's going on, and explain to them. But you've got to acknowledge those feelings when they are in your example here, for people to have that positive experience. Somebody just said, do attorneys really have time for this? Calling people with no update? That is a fantastic statement, because the answer is they don't have time. They absolutely don't have time. And that's why when we teach it at Lawyer Coach at Lawyer.com, there has to be some sort of a system and people in place. And so you have to have, absolutely, I love the comment in the live. No, you shouldn't be doing that. As an attorney, you shouldn't be. And when Colleen and Gary are referencing the attorneys in this example, they're referencing the law firm. They're saying the firm needs to reach out. And so if somebody calls, and by the way, this is even more powerful, is if somebody calls and says, hey, Colleen wanted me to reach out to you and give you an update on what was going on. It shows two things. One, the attorney is very busy, and there's this authority that's just demonstrated because the attorney's busy. Two, the attorney then cared enough to make sure that the message was conveyed. And so, yes, the attorney doesn't have time, or no, the attorney does not have time, but it still has to be done. And having the right people in place to get that done is key. Love that comment came in at that time. Yeah. So moving on real quickly. Number two, I put as the attorneys, when they do communicate, they give too much information. They share with them far too much information. In fact, we often share the phrase, the confused mind does nothing. And oftentimes when the attorney's sharing too much information and the person is just like, I'm confused, I'm going to do nothing. And that's, and when we've spoken at conferences together, the three of us, we've asked people, how many of you know that you've shared too much information? And all the attorneys will raise their hand. All the attorneys will be like, oh, I'm so guilty of that, just giving way too much information and causing that client to have to think too hard. You know, and so that's what I would put number two. Colleen, you said number one is that we just don't communicate. Number two, when we do communicate, we give too much information. And then Gary, bring us home with number three.
All right, number three comes in at attorneys focusing too much on themselves and what's important to them as opposed to the client. And let me elaborate a little bit. So I always think that every interaction is an opportunity to further the cause. And so, you know, I always look for opportunities to use the principle of liking, well, all of them actually. I assess whether or not I can apply the different influence triggers. So think about this: when communicating with somebody, by focusing on them and what's important to them, you're building rapport, right? And so when you're building rapport, you're engaging liking, which really is important to the overall relationship. Because, you know, there was another study that talked about physicians who had a good bedside manner were far less likely to be sued for malpractice than the doctors who were maybe better doctors but didn't have a good bedside manner, right? So communication really is important. Then I think the other thing would be to by focusing on them, I think what you're also able to do is take advantage of the law of reciprocity that may come into play a little bit later on, because you're extending to them some of the things that you're probably going to be asking for back. And in the back of my mind, I'm hearing some of the attorneys on the call saying, well, we have to let them know how good we are, right? That we're an authority, that, you know, I need to tell them this, that, and the next thing. And to which I would say, yes, we do want to let them know, but we can let them know in ways other than coming from you, like using previous client testimonies or reviews, things of that nature. So it's not you saying it, it's other people saying it. And then I think there's also an opportunity to bring in social proof in what I just said too, right? Because rather than you saying it, it is previous clients saying it. So yeah, I think I would sum it up by saying that they should be focusing more on what the client wants to hear and needs to hear, but in a way that it's not them bragging on themselves.
You know what's interesting about that, Gary, is last week I was at the orthodontist with one of my children, and we were sitting there, and it was our first meeting with the orthodontist. Okay, and we were meeting with the lady who was going to prepare us to meet with the orthodontist, and she's like, "Oh my goodness, Dr. Wood is amazing. You are going to love him. He is so good at what he does. And so by the time Dr. Wood came in, we already liked him. And Dr. Wood said nothing. We weren't like, are you credible to do this? And she would just be like, oh, his patients love him. He's just so good at this, and this. In fact, that's why I love working here. It's just, and then by the time he came in, total credibility. All he did was assess the situation, and then he walked out the door. And by the way, he didn't talk money. He didn't talk any of those things either. And then the lady goes, okay, he left. And then the lady that was helping us goes, okay, so this is how it looks. This is what's going to cost, and broke everything down and kept him in that authority position. And we'll do a later LinkedIn Live when it comes to money, because we need to, in fact, we'll talk about that maybe even next week. But we that money issue that so many attorneys botch. So many botch when it comes to the money, and they end up discounting their work, and they end up giving free work away, and they don't collect, which is another big thing, Colleen, that you really
totally.
So with that being said, those are the three. Work on those three. Not the number one trap, just simply not communicating. Number two, giving out too much information. And number three, making it all about you, the attorney, rather than the client. Awesome. Love the comments. Love being with you, Colleen and Gary. And we'll see you soon.
See you next week, guys. Thank you.
See ya.